On the night of April 4th, 1923, the entire city of Cairo suddenly fell into darkness. At that same moment, inside a luxurious hotel, Lord Carnarvon was dying from a small wound on his face. He was the man who had financed the excavation of Pharaoh Tutankhamun's tomb. Only a few months earlier, Carnarvon had crossed a doorway that had remained sealed for more than 3,000 years. According to legend, at the exact moment he died, his dog in England howled and suddenly collapsed. Newspapers immediately declared that the pharaoh's curse had begun claiming its victims. Over the following years, several people connected to the excavation also passed away. Some died from illness, some suffered accidents, and others met their ends under circumstances that seemed difficult to explain. But were they truly hunted by an ancient supernatural force? Or did they simply become victims of a sensational story created to sell newspapers? Let us return to the Valley of the Kings and uncover the truth behind the most terrifying curse in ancient Egyptian history. Tutankhamun ascended the throne around 1332 BCE when he was only 8 or 9 years old. He ruled during the 18th dynasty of Egypt's New Kingdom. His original name was Tutankhaten, meaning the living image of the god Aten. His father or predecessor, Akhenaten, had launched a religious revolution that shook ancient Egypt. Akhenaten reduced the importance of Egypt's traditional gods and elevated the sun god Aten to the center of religious life. After Akhenaten's death, the royal court began reversing his controversial reforms. Tutankhaten changed his name to Tutankhamun and restored the worship of Amun and the other traditional gods. Although he held the title of pharaoh, the young king may have been heavily influenced by powerful advisors and military commanders. His short reign produced neither the great conquests nor the monumental building projects associated with many other pharaohs. When Tutankhamun died at approximately 18 or 19 years old, his name quickly faded into obscurity. The exact cause of Tutankhamun's death remains a subject of debate. Early X-ray images led some researchers to suspect that he had been struck on the back of the head. The theory that he was assassinated therefore became an exciting story for the public. However, later studies suggested that the damaged bones may have resulted from the mummification process or the excavation itself. Computed tomography scans also revealed a serious fracture in the king's left leg. Researchers found additional evidence suggesting that Tutankhamun had been infected with malaria parasites. He may also have suffered from several health problems associated with the royal family's tradition of marrying close relatives. The leg injury, combined with disease, may have overwhelmed his young body. Nevertheless, the available evidence still cannot fully reconstruct the final days of his life. His sudden death may have forced the preparation of his tomb to be completed in great haste. Tutankhamun was buried in the Valley of the Kings near the modern city of Luxor. Compared with the tombs of many other pharaohs, his final resting place was relatively small. Some researchers believe the tomb may originally have been prepared for someone who was not a pharaoh. The walls of the burial chamber also appear to have been completed more hastily than those in many other royal tombs. The king's body was placed inside several nested coffins and a series of gilded shrines. Thousands of objects were buried with him to serve his needs on the journey into the afterlife. They included chariots, a throne, weapons, jewelry, clothing, food, and personal belongings. Ancient thieves broke into the tomb on at least 2 occasions. However, its entrance was later resealed and gradually covered by rubble and workers' huts. Because of this remarkable accident of history, most of Tutankhamun's treasures survived for more than 3,000 years. In the early 20th century, British archaeologist Howard Carter became convinced that Tutankhamun's tomb was still hidden somewhere beneath the valley. Carter was a persistent excavator who was particularly skilled at copying ancient Egyptian artwork. His work was financed by George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. Lord Carnarvon was a wealthy aristocrat with a passion for archaeology, although his health was poor. For years, Carter's team searched one area after another without finding an intact royal tomb. As the costs continued to rise, Carnarvon considered ending the project. Carter persuaded him to finance one final excavation season in 1922. The team focused its attention on an area covered by the remains of ancient workers' huts. It was one of the few locations in the valley that had not been thoroughly investigated. No one realized that one of the century's most famous archaeological discoveries was waiting only a few meters beneath them. On November 4th, 1922, the excavation team discovered a step carved directly into the bedrock. A popular story claims that an Egyptian water boy accidentally uncovered the first step. However, historians continue to debate the boy's identity and his precise role in the discovery. As the rubble was removed, a staircase leading down to a plastered doorway gradually appeared. The seals of the ancient royal necropolis were still visible upon the door. Carter understood that an incompletely looted tomb might be waiting behind it. He ordered the entrance to be covered again and sent a telegram asking Carnarvon to come to Egypt immediately. On November 24th, Tutankhamun's name was identified on the seals. Their excitement was quickly mixed with anxiety when they noticed signs of ancient break-ins. No one knew whether the second doorway concealed a magnificent treasure or nothing more than empty chambers. On November 26, 1922, Carter made a small opening in the upper corner of the inner doorway. He pushed a candle through the opening to test the air and peered into the darkened room. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, strange shapes and flashes of gold slowly emerged. Carnarvon impatiently asked Carter whether he could see anything. Carter replied that he could see wonderful things. Before them stood ceremonial beds, chariots, chests, statues, and countless objects covered in gold. 2 life-sized black statues guarded another sealed doorway. That doorway led to the burial chamber, containing the body of the young pharaoh. The tomb, later designated KV-62, was eventually found to contain more than 5,000 artifacts. The discovery instantly transformed Tutankhamun from a forgotten king into a global icon. Documenting and preserving the objects inside the antechamber took many months. Every artifact had to be numbered, photographed, stabilized, and moved with extraordinary care. On February 16, 1923, Carter opened the entrance to the burial chamber in the presence of officials and invited guests. Inside stood a system of gilded shrines that occupied nearly the entire room. Beyond these protective layers, the team found a stone sarcophagus and 3 nested coffins. The innermost coffin was made of gold and contained Tutankhamun's mummy. Covering the king's face was the golden mask that would become one of the most famous masterpieces of ancient Egyptian art. The discovery made the world more fascinated with ancient Egypt than ever before. Yet, while the public marveled at the treasure, a much darker story was beginning to develop. Only a few weeks after the burial chamber was opened, Lord Carnarvon became ill. Carnarvon had been bitten on the face by a mosquito and accidentally infected the wound while shaving. The infection became increasingly severe, and his already weakened body was unable to resist it. On April 5, 1923, Carnarvon died in Cairo. His death was attributed to blood poisoning and pneumonia. Newspapers reported that Cairo's electricity failed at the exact moment of his death. Another story claimed that Carnarvon's dog howled in England before suddenly dying. These dramatic details were difficult to verify, but they rapidly spread across newspapers around the world. Some reports even claimed that Tutankhamun's mummy had a wound in the same location as Carnarvon's mosquito bite. Coincidence transformed a death caused by infection into supposed evidence of supernatural revenge. From that moment, the phrase, "the Pharaoh's curse," began to haunt the imagination of the world. Many stories claim that Carter found a tablet warning that death would come to anyone who disturbed the pharaoh's sleep. Another version stated that the curse had been carved directly onto the tomb's doorway. However, the archaeological records do not confirm the existence of this famous warning anywhere inside KV-62. The ancient Egyptians sometimes placed threatening inscriptions inside tombs to protect the dead. Such warnings usually emphasized divine punishment or the destruction of the trespasser's identity. They did not necessarily describe a magical force capable of hunting down every archaeologist in the modern world. Most of the inscriptions inside Tutankhamun's tomb concern religious rituals and the king's journey into the afterlife. Therefore, the frequently quoted curse was probably a creation of the modern imagination. Once the public believed that a curse existed, however, every subsequent death began to appear suspicious. The list of Tutankhamun's supposed victims continued to grow. American businessman George J. Gould died from pneumonia after visiting the tomb in 1923. Aubrey Herbert, Carnarvon's half-brother, also died that year after suffering from long-term health problems. Egyptologist Arthur Mace passed away in 1928 following an extended illness. Richard Bethel, Carter's secretary, was found dead inside a London club in 1929. Bethel's father, Lord Westbury, later died after falling from the window of his apartment in 1930. Newspapers connected these separate events and created the impression that an invisible force was systematically eliminating the tomb's intruders. Some lists included almost anyone who had seen the artifacts or had some association with the excavation team. Even when several years passed between the opening of the tomb and a person's death, that death was still presented as evidence. Those who remained healthy were rarely mentioned because their survival did not support the frightening narrative. This selective use of information made the curse appear far more convincing than the actual evidence suggested. If the curse targeted the first person to enter the tomb, Howard Carter should have been its most obvious victim. Carter personally opened the doorway, looked inside the antechamber, and supervised the dismantling of the nested coffins. Nevertheless, he lived for almost 17 years after discovering the tomb. Carter died from lymphoma in 1939 at the age of 64. Lady Evelyn Herbert, Carnarvon's daughter and one of the first people to see the chamber, lived until 1980. Many experts, Egyptian officials, and local workers involved in the excavation also lived for several more decades. A historical study published in the medical journal BMJ compared the lifespans of people who had and had not been exposed to the tomb. The study found no convincing evidence that exposure increased the risk of death. Those supposedly exposed to the curse still lived to an average age of approximately 70. These figures seriously undermine the theory that a supernatural power was killing the tomb's visitors. Although there is little evidence for a supernatural curse, a tomb sealed for thousands of years could still contain genuine dangers. Bacteria, fungal spores, and toxic organic substances can survive inside enclosed archaeological spaces. Certain fungi, including Aspergillus, can cause serious problems for people with weakened immune systems. Bat droppings, ancient dust, and accumulated gases may also damage the respiratory system. This possibility produced the theory that Carnarvon and others inhaled dangerous pathogens after entering the tomb. However, there is no direct evidence that a fungus inside KV62 caused a series of deaths. Carnarvon entered the tomb several times, yet the people accompanying him did not all become ill. His medical records also attributed his death to an infected wound rather than an ancient toxin. The biological killer theory is therefore more plausible than magic, but there is still insufficient evidence to confirm it. The true dangers encountered during archaeological excavations may come from dust, disease, accidents, and harsh working conditions. The story of the curse developed during an era when newspapers competed fiercely for readers. Carnarvon had granted the Times of London exclusive rights to report on the excavation. Other newspapers had limited access and therefore needed to find a more sensational angle. Carnarvon's death gave them the perfect story of revenge from beyond the grave. Unverified details were repeated until the public began accepting them as fact. The growing fascination with ancient Egypt also brought golden masks, mummies, and magic into popular culture. Novels, films, and advertisements continued to promote the image of a mummy rising to punish the living. Within that narrative, the contributions of hundreds of Egyptian workers and experts were often overlooked. Fear of the curse eventually became almost as famous as Tutankhamun's treasure itself. Perhaps the greatest power of the curse was never hidden inside the tomb, but within the way people chose to tell its story. After more than a century of research, no reliable scientific evidence has shown that Tutankhamun's curse ever killed anyone. The famous deaths can be explained through illness, infection, accidents, and coincidence. Yet this does not make the story of KV62 any less mysterious. A young king who died unexpectedly was forgotten by history for more than 3,000 years. His small tomb survived by chance while most other royal burial places were looted. When its doorway was finally reopened, the modern world transformed Tutankhamun's death into an immortal legend. The curse may not have killed anyone, but it has prevented millions of people from looking away from ancient Egypt. Do you believe this was merely a creation of the newspapers, or could another secret still be sleeping inside the tomb? Share your theory in the comments and send this video to anyone who loves historical mysteries. Do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so that you can join us as we uncover more secrets buried by time in our upcoming videos.